The King has returned. The prophecies fulfilled. The years of longing are over. The King has returned. And now all will be made right. Amidst shouts of praise and tears of joy, the pleading for justice, the cries for our enemies' defeat. The King has returned. The King who was driven from his land as an infant, who spent his first years as a refugee, who understands pain and suffering. But this King is not who we were looking for. This King brings justice, not over our enemies, but in the midst of our enemies. He brings peace, not in our land, but in our souls. He is the answer to the prayer we did not know we were praying. The King has returned. Long live the King.
So if you're new here, my name's Dustin. We're so glad you're here. You received a handout with some info on us and a giant card for you to give us info on you. If you want to, please, that's all we want from you today. Just fill that card out and take it to the coffee bar on your way out. Here's what's going to happen when you fill that card out. I'm going to text you. If you give me a phone number, I will text you. If you give me an email, I will email you. But I just want to open a line of communication, say, hey, what's up? How are you? How was Sunday? Anything I can help you with. And that's going to be it. But I just want to open that line of communication for you and for us. But if that's you today, if you're new here and you want to fill that card out, please do and give it to me or Leslie or someone at the coffee bar out in the foyer on your way out. We would love to meet you. Okay, so let's get going. Mark chapter 9. We're in this Mark series, Servant King. Been here a while, going to be here a little longer. I really love it, really enjoying it. I'm really enjoying it. But this week's topic is maybe my least enjoyable, just to be honest. One of those where it's just like, man, we're doing this. We're going to do it. We got to go on and do it. And we need to do it, just to be honest. But it is a tension for me, always in this place. So much so. Have anybody ever seen the movie Big Daddy? Do you remember the Adam Sandler movie Big Daddy? Right, where this guy who's kind of a loser dude gets the kid. Somehow, I can't remember how he gets this little kid, and they're like at the grocery store, dented cans are half price, and so he's got this little kid, and he's teaching him to dent cans at the grocery store. And but there's this, when Adam Sandler, his character, is this guy who, he has a colorful mouth from time to time, and he will say, earmuffs, 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 and he's screaming at the kid, and it means cover your ears to the child so you can't hear the bad things that I'm saying. And that's kind of how I feel about today. Because I know that we're doing this family worship thing, and I think it's a great thing. And I know many of you probably seen that article that we've shared on Facebook about kind of how this works and integrating children into our worship and our families worshiping together and the value of that. But today is one of those where I go, earmuffs, earmuffs, earmuffs. But it's the wrong reason to do earmuffs. Because the very context in which we find Mark chapter 9, verse 42, that context of this teaching is in the presence of a child. And so I want us to kind of look at that, but let me give you some background on the context and just remind you of where we've been and where we're going. Mark chapter 9, we saw that this, last week we looked at this idea of pride, and that the disciples are these guys who have done good things that God's going to use in a powerful way, and he has already used them in some powerful way, and he's given them special opportunity and special place and special opportunity for service, yet they still don't get it, right? They still go around going, well, I'm the greatest, well, I'm the best, well, I'm the greatest, well, I want to be first, well, I have this ability and this ability, and so he catches them kind of arguing, and he kind of just cuts them all down to size and says, in the kingdom of God, in my kingdom, in what I'm doing, if you want to be first, if you want to be the greatest, if you want to be the best, then you need to make yourself the least. That you need to be the servant of all, and he's pointing to himself and how he's going to be the servant of all. And then there's something that we didn't cover last week that I think should have gotten covered in Connect Chat on Thursday nights. But verses 37 through 41 is that John, we see, in Mark, you always see Peter talking. Peter's always the one asking questions. He's always the one sticking his foot in his mouth. He's always the one that's brave enough to talk back to Jesus. But here we see John come up after that and say, Jesus, there's this guy down the street. There's this dude down the street, and I'm paraphrasing. This is my paraphrase. There's this dude down the street, and he's preaching in your name, and he's doing good things in your name, but he doesn't hang with us. He doesn't follow us. He's not doing what you do, Jesus. He's talking about you, Jesus. He's sharing about you, Jesus. He's not doing what you do. And John says, what should we do? How should we deal with this guy? Should like he come and be a part of what we got going on? Or, should we go and tell him to stop talking about you? What should we do? And Jesus goes, John, just chill, essentially. He says if he's not against us, he's for us, right? Don't stop him from doing this good work. If he's doing good things in my name, don't stop him. And then he goes into the context of what we're about to walk through in this 42. And so here's what I want us to do. I want us just to read 42 through 58 verses. And then we're going to just kind of walk through it because I think it's all so tied together that we need to read it as a whole. And then we'll break it down. So you'll have to read it twice, or I will. All right, verse 42. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin. Now, you remember the context of last week? Right, Jesus says, here's a great illustration for you. Let me grab this little kid who's in that culture was worth nothing. All right, he grabs a little kid, he's holding the little kid. So in this context, he's still holding that child. They have not left the house. They're still there. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a great millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea. And if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. For it is better for you to enter life crippled than with two hands to go to hell, to the unquenchable fire. And if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life lame than with 2 feet to be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with one eye than with 2 eyes to be thrown into hell, where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. For everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if it has lost its salt, if the salt has lost its saltiness, how will you make it salty again? Have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. So now you know why I wanted to go earmuffs, right? But the reason that I've resisted that and resisted saying that before we got in here, sending out that mass email or mass Facebook post, is the very context that Jesus is holding a child when he says this. He's literally sitting with a child and teaching these truths and still using that child as an illustration. So verse 42, we see whoever causes one of these little ones, the child, to believe in me, who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a great millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea. Okay, so Jesus is still using this child as a metaphor, yet he's pointing back to John's question of John saying, this guy doesn't understand everything that's going on with you, Jesus. He doesn't understand what you are and who you are and what you're going to do and all that you're saying to us, yet he's still out here doing these things. And so Jesus is saying that man, although this child is the physical little one in the room, he's pointing back to that person who may not be as far along in the faith. That person who may be a weaker Christian, a believer, or maybe a person struggling with doubt and working all of this out within themselves, saying, I believe, as the Father said, I believe, help my unbelief. That person that may be walking down that road. So Jesus is kind of twofold in that pointing, is that one, it's to the child, obviously, who would believe in him, but also to the weaker person or the weaker Christian that might be struggling through something. So here's the reality: causing others to sin is pretty big deal. So here'd be your first point, kiddos, or if you're taking notes, if you're filling out the outline, the result of leading others into sin is punishment. Look at what Jesus says. It would be better. So he's speaking. He uses that all throughout that text, right? It would be better for you to poke your eye out than go to hell. It would be better for you to cut your foot off than to go to hell. It would be better for you to have a millstone, a big, huge rock chained around your head, and you thrown into the ocean head first. Not around your foot, right, so that you might slip out, but around your neck so that there's no getting out, and you're going head first into the ocean. It would be better for you to die than to lead someone away from me. To lead someone away from believing in me, away from my way. That's a very, very strong warning that Jesus is giving us. And here's something that we need to point out in this, because there's a distinction between verse 42 and verse 43 through 47. Okay, you still have this hyperbolic language. Jesus is using overstatement or hyperbole, right? I never saw Jesus. We see Jesus in the scriptures like turn tables over and whip people, but he never murders people, right? He is the one who is killed, not the killer, right? All these other prophets, they kill people, right? Muhammad kills people to carry out his will. Jesus lets people kill him to carry out his will. So there's this distinction, but Jesus is using this hyperbole or overstatement to say this is very, very, very significant. This is a stern warning from Jesus. But the interesting thing is that the language that he uses in 42 and the language that he's going to use in regards to hell is different, right? It is this idea of being disciplined or being punished or being hurt or maybe even being killed for doing something against the will and the way of the Lord, but it's not eternal in verse 42. You get to 43 through 47 and it's forever. Verse 42 is this idea of drowning. How long does it take for a person to drown? 2-3 minutes? See, Jesus is kind of, his metaphor is kind of breaking apart these two things, or his teaching is kind of breaking apart these two ideas. The good thing about this, the one good thing about this teaching here is that it doesn't have to be eternal. You and I have all led other people into sin, whether that was a friend, whether that was a loved one, whether that was a child, whether that was someone we didn't know. Our choices, our lack of the right choices, one way or the other, or our choosing or not choosing, our doing or not doing, has led people away from Jesus, and it's unfortunate. But the punishment doesn't have to just be punishment. It can be discipline, and there's a difference between punishment and discipline. Punishment is this pouring out, like done with you. This discipline is this opportunity to take that punishment, to take that hurt, to take that pain that we might experience and return back to the right way. You see, we can repent and confess our failures and our failures to other people. We should obviously repent and confess our failures to Jesus for leading other people into sin. But there's also an opportunity for him to take those failures, to take those problems that we've created, us be humble about that and confess that, and it becomes a powerful work of God in our lives and the lives around us. We can look at someone that we've led into sin and say, man, I was wrong. Man, I carry that, I shoulder that, I confess that, I acknowledge that, and I need to make it right with you. You see, if you remember last week, my favorite part of the sermon last week was this statement, simple: humility is a choice. It's always a choice. Confession is this verbalization of the humility of your heart, this posture of your person coming out of your mouth, maybe to God, and maybe it needs to come out to other people. Maybe it's the need to ask for forgiveness or to give forgiveness. Maybe it's a tough, hard conversation, but Jesus gives us such a strong warning that we should heed it and let that turn positive in our life. Let him use it in a powerful way. That's when your valley becomes the place of vision, when your struggling becomes a place of victory, is when you turn it over in humility to the Lord. But there's another reason for such a strong warning. You know, I don't know that Jesus, maybe he's speaking actively to the deacons. I know that it speaks actively, like if we put ourselves in this situation, it speaks very actively to me. Should speak very actively to all of us. But there's also this kind of principalized part of it to me, that he says, it's better for you, literally says, it's better for you to die than to lead someone away from me. All right? But why? Because being apart from Christ is a serious, eternal consequence, horrifying problem of sin. And that's where he goes next, right? He continues with this idea, these kind of Jewish hyperbolic statements. It's better for it, it's better for it. And so we're going to read that again, 43. And if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life crippled than with 2 hands go to hell to the unquenchable fire. And if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off, for it is better for you to enter life lame than with 2 feet to be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out. It's better for you to enter the kingdom of God with 1 eye than with 2 eyes be thrown into hell, where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. Okay, so when I read that, here's the reality. The reality is that the reality of sin is hell. That's your next point. The reality of sin is hell. Pushback. Maybe you're here and you're struggling with belief. You struggle to believe the scriptures. I know that people, I hope that people that are struggling with belief and struggling with the Bible and struggling to understand feel like they can walk in the doors of this church and feel welcomed, right? And you can come in here and sit. Okay, so if that's you here today, maybe one of those questions that you ask when you read that, is Jesus advocating self-harm? Or for a kid, maybe, is Jesus telling me to really cut my arm off? Right? You know, I'm going to move quickly through this story. Matt, the pastor at the Arab campus, we're working through this, and he said when he was in Bible college that there was a guy who had some disabilities, but he literally took this passage literal, and he plucked his eyes out. Really happened. And so I want to just be clear. Jesus is not advocating self-harm, but he's making a hyperbolic overstatement on the severity of something that is very true, on the reality that sin is somewhere that leads you far worse than self-harm. That it really would be better for you to cut your hand off if that would fix it. But the problem is that won't fix it. Because see, you can cut your hand off and you can still be a thief with 1 hand. You can pluck your eye out and you can still be a luster with 1 eye, right? You can pluck both eyes out and still be a luster. You can cut both hands off and you'll still be a thief. You can cut both feet off and you can still be someone who will kick people when they're down or run around on their wife, right? So it's not a problem of my feet or my hands or my eyes. It's a problem deep down within me that we need to understand. So Jesus is not advocating self-harm, but he's making this statement for us to understand the severity and the reality of sin. And most of our culture, let's just be honest, I know this is a hard sermon. Believe me, I'm preaching it, okay? I've been dwelling on it all week. All right, so the reality is this, is that you and I think sin is cute, fun, and funny. When the reality is sin is incredibly destructive, brings death, and eventually brings the wrath of God on us. You see, we might think a one-night stand is no big deal, cohabitation is no big deal, drunkenness is no big deal, or good old-fashioned gossip and lying are just little white lies. But the reality is they all have this condemning, destroying power in our life that one begets the other and begets the other until eventually we are destroyed. You know, there's that old statement that we say, you know, we say it, I think we say it with good intentions, like all sin's the same, you know? All sin's the same. We're all sinners. Yes, but not all sin is the same. That's like saying, I'm on this Frozen Planet kick. Anybody Frozen Planet? No, me and Tucker. Yes, and Charlie. Frozen Planet's really good. You need to watch it on Netflix. Okay, and so there's these polar bears. And so I get to thinking about polar bears. You know, like they're meat eaters. They only eat meat. Now, a grizzly bear is almost as big as a polar bear. But a grizzly bear is omnivore. Like he'll eat some berries, he'll hang out with some leaves, eat some roots. And if the right kind of animal just runs by, he's going to take it out and eat it, right? He'll eat some meat every once in a while if he's really hungry. Then there's the black bear, right? So you got like the polar bear's the biggest and the nastiest. And he will eat. He sees you and I if we walk into the Arctic as food, right? A free meal. All right. The grizzly bear doesn't really see us as food, but if we're a threat to him, he'll take us out. He's big and strong. And then there's the black bear, right? We're all accustomed to the black bear. We've had the infamous black bear in Albertville recently, right? He's eating out of the trash can. He's like, the humans left some pancakes, okay? Now, all three are bears. The polar bear obviously sees you as food, will eat you. The grizzly bear will eat you if he has to, and the black bear will eat you if you threaten him, right? That's kind of how you see that. But they're all bears. And every person in the room, no matter how strong and big we are, and we've got some big and strong guys in here, they'll eat you too, right? Sin's that way. Sin can get you, certain sins can get you faster to destruction. Certain sins can destroy your life quicker than other sins. And sometimes we feel justified in just that we're someone that doesn't have the big sin, that we're someone that just tells white lies and gossips and slanders, just talk about the people who do all the bad things. And maybe we're someone who does the bad things, and at least we don't gossip and slander and talk about all the bad people who do the bad, don't do the bad, that talk about us, right? I've got it all tongue-tied right there, right? But the reality is, it's all a bear. Sin is a bear. The Bible describes it as Satan as a roaring lion, right? He seeks to devour you. In the book of Genesis, like Cain and Abel, God says, sin is crouching at your door, and its desire is to eat you. And it eats Cain, right? And it's one of the big ones, right? It's murder. That's a big one. Change your life forever. Change everyone's life forever, right? But the reality is that we think sin is fun, and then sometimes it is fun in the moment, and we lie to ourselves. And that's what Jesus is pressing on, is that this sin, even the smallest sins, God is so holy, so right, so good, so perfect, that even the smallest white lie, the smallest attitude of dissension, the smallest, I'm better than them, is this pride manifesting in my heart, brings death and destruction. The reality is that sin and hell are not fun and not fun forever, but the reality is that sin and hell are death and destruction and the wrath of God poured out on us forever. And hell is a real place. So question number 2, if you're pushing back on that idea, is Jesus speaking metaphorically about hell? And I would say yes. Now, before you stone me, I know, I would say yes. He's using a symbol. He's using symbols to describe the wrath of God in hell. Will there be fire? I think probably so. Will there be darkness at the same time as fire? He says so, right? So in different contexts, you see Jesus here is describing it as hell, unquenchable fire, as a place called Gehenna, which was a physical place in Israel where they burned junk, like the trash heap. They set it on fire. That's kind of what Jesus is using to describe hell. He's describing, in some of his parables, he's described hell as outer darkness where there's gnashing of teeth. Here he describes it as a place where there's unquenchable fire and a worm that doesn't die. How do those two things exist at the same time? No, but he said it. And so here's what I would say. And John Piper, I read some things on John Piper, and sometimes we think if we say that, well, he's speaking in metaphor, that it's about the fire's a metaphor, and the darkness is a metaphor, and the worm's a metaphor, and the unquenchable fire is a metaphor, and Gehenna, this place outside of Israel, is a metaphor, is a symbol. We think that we're making hell less scary, less serious. But the reality is that we're not. Piper says this. He says, symbols are less than reality, not more. Suppose fire is a symbol. Do people use symbols of horror because the reality is less horrible than the more horrible? I don't know anyone that uses symbolic language for horrible realities, when the literal language would make it sound much more horrible. What would be the point of that? You see, we grasp towards symbols, things that we can see and feel, to describe things that maybe we don't understand or maybe we can't see or feel, and hopefully we never will. Piper goes on, he says, think about this. If I say my wife is the diamond of my life, okay? She's the diamond of my life. Is there anyone in the room who goes, man, you just called her a diamond. She must be really bad, right? No. You don't look and go, well, he just equated her to something that's dug out of the ground. It's a rock. She must be less valuable than a diamond, right? She's not worth like $5,000, is she? That's a little one. We all know that, right? You see, it's foolish for us to say. It would be foolish for us to say that that's only a symbol. No, it is a symbol, but it's a picture of something more valuable to me than jewelry, more valuable than a diamond. But it's a way that I use that symbol to describe the most valuable thing that I can, the most beautiful thing that I can think of is to describe her that way, right? When I don't have words to describe it. Likewise, Jesus chose the most horrific imagery that anyone could think of to describe the wrath of God in hell. And I don't want to go there to figure out if it's fire or not, or if it's darkness or not. Here's what I do know, that Jesus says that it's a reality. The language of cutting the arm off and the hand off and all those things are different than the language that he's using to describe hell. He describes it as eternal, like forever. Like you drown at the bottom of the ocean, it's over in 2 minutes. You go to the fires of hell, it's forever. As conscious, right? He says that where the worm does not die and the fire does not cease. You know, when you and I drown in 2 minutes, our consciousness ends, right? And we enter into one place or the other, right? Heaven or hell. But in hell, we're conscious, our soul, our mind, we're conscious in that place forever. It is horrible, horrible, far more than we could ever imagine. And sin takes us there. If you want to make notes on hell, those are the notes, right? It's eternal conscious punishment, the wrath of God, and sin takes you there. That's what Jesus wants us to understand. As hard as that is for us to hear and to stomach, and especially in our culture. And the unfortunate thing is that you and I can gouge our eyes out and we'll still go there. You and I can cut both feet off and we'll still go there. You and I can cut both hands off and we'll still go there unless our heart is changed, unless our heart is cut out and transformed and made new. And only Jesus can do that. You and I can't do that by coming to church every Sunday. You and I can't do that by giving enough money. You and I can't do that by reading our Bible every day, by raising our kids to perfection, by only drinking water and eating vegetables. You and I can't do that. You see, the rescue, this is your third point, the rescue from sin is a relationship with Jesus. That's the only rescue that you and I can find, is a relationship with Jesus. Let's read on. 49 and 50. It seems almost out of place, these two verses. And in fact, the computer thought that too, because the computer did not have these verses in it for some weird reason. 49 and 50. For everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if the salt has lost its saltiness, how will you make it salty again? And then the statement, have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. The rescue from sin is a relationship with Jesus, because Jesus is the one who lived a life of perfection, never looking at a woman inappropriately, never taking something that wasn't his, even if it was a toy or an answer off a test, or even if it was a music download, never taking anything that was his, that wasn't his, never lying, never gossiping, never slandering. Jesus was perfect, and he went to the cross, a perfect man, dying for the sinner, you and I. The prideful, imperfect man, being broken and busted for us, being whipped, nailed to the cross, and he experiences the absence of God, not just the absence of God, but I believe in that moment on the cross, the full wrath of God that was destined for you and I, those of us who trusted him, for eternity. So think about that. God said, what you've done is bad enough that I will punish you forever. But I punished Jesus in such a way, in such power, with such wrath, and it's so destructive that it was done in about 4 hours. The wrath of God is poured out on Jesus on the cross, and Jesus' perfection soaks it up. And then, of course, Jesus rises from the dead to proclaim that this has been done. The debt of sin has been paid, and you and I might be free from the fires of hell, where we don't have to cut both our hands off and cut our heart out, but that our heart can be transformed and we can be made salty. Notice that he says, how will you make it salty again? Interesting question. If salt has lost its saltiness, how will you make it salty again? Here's the answer. Salt doesn't lose its saltiness unless it's burned or goes through a chemical reaction with some other thing, right? Sodium chloride, salt, has this flavor. And it's hard to mask salt, isn't it? You know, put too much salt on something, bacon, too much salt, right? Somebody loves it, somebody hates it. Most of us love it, let's be real, right? But it's hard to hide salt. It's hard to put it away. So how is it that one might lose their saltiness? Well, they might not be salt. They might not be salt. You see, if you look back in this culture that Jesus, when we think of salty, when I say, are you salty, what do you think of? like an old Navy guy, an old Marine. I know we got some Navy guys in the back that know exactly what salty means, right? This old, grumpy, disgruntled, bitter captain, colonel, superior that just gripes and complains and just angry all the time. When you think of salty, that's probably maybe what you think of. But when Jesus says salty, he thinks of something entirely different, right? Salt was even used as currency in ancient Rome. Like that it was currency. It's how people were paid. The Latin words, which is the language of Rome, not necessarily the language of the Bible, but the language around that culture, the root words for soldier and salary can be traced to the words meaning giving and receiving salt. Salt was incredibly valuable. It wasn't just what they made bacon, but it was how they lived their life. It's how they preserved their food. So you season with it. That's how we use salt mostly, right? Seasoning. We don't use salt to its fullest potential, right? We want to salt the roads and salt our bacon and salt our potatoes or whatever. But salt was used as a preservative in that culture. It was used, one, in farming, but two, as a preservative. You know, olives, huge deal in Palestine culture. Cucumbers, right? And when you take cucumbers and you want them to stay for a while, you want them to keep them for a while, what do you do? Pickle them, salt them. Olives, you want to keep them for a while. You want to keep them through winter, what do? Salt them, pickle them. And so when they didn't have refrigeration, salt became this way of preserving life, preserving what kept them alive, helping them live. Salt was very, very valuable, even, as I said earlier, currency. So when Jesus says, have salt in yourselves, he's saying, preserve this world. Make a difference in this world. He's saying, live to care for the weak in verse 42. He's saying, live to be at peace with one another in verse 50. And he's saying, live rightly in 43 through 48. He's like, live the right way. Don't lead people away from God, from me. So again, how do you and I become salty again? You know, when you look into salt mining, anybody ever looked into salt mining? Anybody ever been to the salt flats? Maybe Salt Lake City, maybe the Dead Sea, the ocean. You know, all those things become salty, but it's because there's this deposit of salt, probably in the bottom, right? In the bottom of the ocean, you have these big just deposits of salt. Or at the bottom of the Dead Sea, you have just salt, salt, salt. Nothing can even live in the Dead Sea, right? Dead Sea, right? Salt Lake City, very few things can live in Salt Lake in Utah. And it's just these big deposits of this mineral salt. And it keeps things from living, just period. But so when we go and mine salt in those areas, what we do is we get up these big salt rocks and we bring them up out of the water, out of the bottom of the water, or from wherever they are, the mine, and they take them and they put them through this process where they evaporate water, boil them, cook them, and break the salt up. Literally crush the salt, divide it up. And then and only then does the salt become really valuable, right? Because when the salt's a big rock of salt, you know, if you ever poured your ice cream machine out on the weeds in your house, around your house, you ever done that? Like the rock salt from your ice cream, just pour it all out. What does it do? It kills the plant. But the salt, as it's broken and spread, it becomes a preservative. In small amounts, it becomes something that makes a huge difference and becomes beneficial to life. But when it's congested and all put together, it becomes something that destroys. So I think for you and I to become salty, the first thing we need to do is understand that we must trust Jesus with a childlike faith. That he was the ultimate giver of salt, broken for us, busted for us, broken up so that you and I might be sprinkled, salted with it. Fire, as you might see in 49. Right? This salting with the goodness of God, that our hearts might be transformed and changed and we might become like him. And that requires the faith of a child, childlike faith, the little one. So we all begin there. And so that would be the first question today for you. Are you a person who needs to trust Jesus with childlike faith? Maybe you don't understand Genesis, maybe you don't understand Revelation, but right now you just realize that hell is a reality, that your sin leads you there, and Jesus is the only one who can get you out. You got to trust him with childlike faith, and he will change your heart. And secondly, to grow as a Christian, you got to do the same thing. You got to do it over and over and over and over again. You see, salt clustered together loses its flavor. It becomes something that isn't beneficial, but is a hardship to the world around it. So when Jesus says, be salt, he's saying to you and I who already believe in him, who've already trusted him, continue to trust me and to walk away from the clusters. When I say clusters, I think of a church that turns inwards and becomes just this big pillar of salt that does nothing but just sit there. But no, we are to break out. We're to be outside of these walls, driving and calling and leading little ones, people who don't know Jesus, back to him. Because we are the salt of the earth. We are the light on the hill. We are the hope of all those people that don't know Jesus, knowing Jesus. Would you walk in faith and let him use you? Would you walk in faith and let him make a difference through you? Pray with me. Jesus, I thank you that we are given the great responsibility, even though it terrifies me, just to be honest. God, help us to not just feel bad today or to feel the weight of that reality of sin and hell today, but to be moved to be salt, to be moved to bring flavor, preservation to the world outside of these walls. Help us to help the weak. Help us to live rightly. Help us to pursue righteousness and holiness, Lord, but at the same time to love as you love. God, we need you to do it. Ask this in your holy name. Amen. Just go ahead and keep your head bowed and your eyes closed for me.